So, hello everyone, Michael Ingledew from TDW. I'm all about making you successful with your technical documentation and technical information strategy. So I am here still at the S1000D user forum, and I know that it's also an ILS forum as well, and Paul will be talking about that very shortly. But in this podcast, those of you who are watching on YouTube, welcome. Those of you who are listening in app or on any of the podcast channels, welcome. I am joined by the one and only Paul Haslam. Now, if you don't know who Paul Haslam is, anybody out there that is working with or using the S1000D specification, you are working with words and technical content that Paul has written and created for you to use. So, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. I know that you're a busy man, and every time you come to these events, people try and railroad you into discussions, and you find yourself in all sorts of corners of the conference hall being asked your opinion on certain things. So maybe just for the audience and for the podcasters, a 20,000-foot overview of who you are, what you do with the standards and the specifications, what your day job entails, and give everybody some context to who you are and what brought you into S1000D and all these other specifications.
All right, that's going to take about half an hour. I had 23 years background in the Royal Air Force as a maintainer in communications. Strangely enough, that's come round full circle, and in terms of my day job, that's kind of getting involved in more and more of that, actually, using S1000D. How did I get into S1000D?
Because you've been in it way longer than me. And
way longer than a lot of people,
yeah.
actually. Yeah, it was 1995, strangely enough, when a gentleman called Dennis Hoyland from the UK MOD Tech Pubs Policy decided that they wanted to adopt not just S1000D but SGML, and so we had a cell to kind of prove that you could convert data for various amounts of money and metrics, and that was very successful and led to other things. When I left the Air Force, I joined the TPSMG as it was then, and now the steering committee, and I've been on that committee ever since. You mentioned about me writing stuff, and way back when we went from being an air-specific specification to one that covers land and sea, I wrote about 20% then, not all of it by any stretch of the imagination.
But that's still a significant amount.
Yeah, but of course that amount has dropped off over the years, but so I've been on that committee ever since. Right now, as far as the steering committee is concerned, I chair the Public Production and Publication Working Group, the PPWG, and as I mentioned yesterday in the conference, that's the group that actually does all the hard work, alongside the EPWG. They're the anoraks that do the schema stuff.
They're the techie brains, right?
Techie branch,
yeah.
And we do the actual writing in the spec itself, and like you say, in Word. Also, I'm on the S1000D Council. I represent the US industry members of the Product Support Committee of the AIA, and also in that function I'm the editor-in-chief of S1000D. I told you this would take a long time.
We've got plenty of time.
And also as part of the AIA duties, I'm on the Product Support Executive Board, and I chair the Specifications and Standards Subcommittee. That subcommittee's role is to foster the adoption of the S-Series in particular amongst the forces in the US and at DoD level. So we're lobbying people from the Pentagon down to try and tell them about the S-Series and try and encourage them to build those specifications into their RFPs. we've had a tremendous amount of success in that.
I'd better say, I mean, I think in general now we're seeing more and more that the specifications are being mandated or actually referenced as a point of contract. In fact, I think aren't you presenting this afternoon on contracting for these new specifications?
Yeah, a gentleman called Jamie Halpern from Boeing in Huntington, California, and myself have written a handbook on how to contract for the S series.
Which is very much needed, by the way.
Yeah, that was a stumbling block in the US, but it's actually developed into a tailoring, interactive tailoring tool that you would tailor the implementation of the S series right down to the common data model.
Right.
So not just like chapters and various specs, but detailed stuff as well. But it's as detailed as you want to go down. It's not saying that you have to get down into attributes of elements in a database.
Sure.
It just gives you that capability.
Sure. So it's more a process document and kind of tailoring what you need to do and what your customers are going to be looking for, or your suppliers are going to be looking for from you in terms of guidance.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Because one of the biggest challenges that I see, certainly because I move a lot in the S1000D circles, is that I see that people are just asking for S1000D without actually saying what it is they want from S1000D and how they want it. And of course, when you've got a supply chain that may not be as well versed as someone like yourself in S1000D, they don't necessarily know the intelligent questions to ask, and that causes a massive problem for, certainly if a sales team just goes along and says S1000D, it's tech pubs, we'll do that, no problem at all. Yeah. And then they don't realize that there is a certain amount of effort involved in making it so. And one of the biggest frustrations, of course, is when people just say we want S1000D and they're not actually understanding exactly what they're asking for.
All right.
And they don't know how they're going to manage that going forward and how they're going to look after it. So again, cheers, Paul, for coming. And apologies if there's any noise in the background. We actually had to set up in a foyer here because the room that we had was actually stolen by somebody else. So, but of course, you must have a day job as well. You're not just constantly working in the S1000D specifications development, or are you working purely in this particular community, just developing the standards and specifications? I'm asking that because I know that you work for somebody, so maybe explain to somebody. So actually, let me give you a little bit of background. I've known Paul we've probably about 10, 15 years, maybe. Yeah, maybe. So, and I knew Paul when he ran a very successful company here in the United Kingdom, and then like every British guy, fell in love and gave it all up in the United Kingdom here, or Brexit Britain as we've been calling it this week, and moved to the United States. And that's where you live and work now. That's where you spend a great deal of time traveling, but your base is Texas, I understand.
Yeah, I'm based in a small town called Weatherford.
So let's look at some questions that I've written down here. So what do you think are some of the major challenges for organizations when it comes to adopting things like S1000D? And I know that I've just sprung this on you, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. I know that we've talked very briefly about contracting, and I think, you know, one of the challenges that I see for sure is that people are never really aware that you need to buy the software to do this, and it's quite a significant investment for a lot of people, and you know, and unless you are technically savvy, you don't know the cheaper tools that are out there that you can actually do this without having to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in capability. And sometimes that actually is where people start looking at S1000D as where this is actually going to cost me in terms of software investment, as opposed to where's it actually going to deliver me my ROI in terms of integration, lifecycle management, interoperability of data, configuration of data, all of these kind of things. So what is that the kind of stuff that you're seeing, or what do you see as some of the people? I know that everyone collars you when you're here. What are they saying to you while you're here?
You're right. There is a conception that you have to have software, and there is software around that does what it's supposed to do, and it can be expensive. But you're also right, it doesn't need to be expensive. S1000D talks about data in terms of common source database. We don't describe software, we don't endorse any software, but what we do is explain all the stuff that makes a database work. And I'll tell you, the stuff that makes a database work is, number one, the data module code. Number two, everything else in the identification status section. When you read stuff about access and how to build an access database, it describes stuff in terms of fields, keys, mandatories.
Sure.
Ident status section, data module code is that.
Yeah.
So you could have a pile of paper that's been produced in S1000D and has some information built in that on those pages in the piece of paper from the identification status section. That pile of paper is a common source database.
Yep, and I think the spec is actually very well written in the terms of it doesn't describe what the data. On my training courses, it says it's an S1000D specification utilizing common source database, and but of course the spec doesn't say what the CSDB is, and it certainly doesn't. And certainly when you walk around and you talk to any of the software vendors here, CSDBs, they're all pretty much the same in terms of function and feature and what they do. And you're right, they're managing all of this metadata that you've just mentioned. Mm-hmm. So for me, one of the biggest reasons that I set up TDW is it's the knowledge gap. It's understanding what it is we're trying to achieve from structured documentation that people really struggle with.
Yeah, and what I find is, in all cases actually, and even this is with people that are savvy about S1000D, is they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what they don't know in a lot of cases is that they do know. They know exactly what needs to be done. But there's some kind of misconception that there's some other mystery that I'm not getting.
Yeah.
But in fact, there is no mystery, and you've got it.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. Now, new people or people that have recently taken up S1000D, that they still are in a situation where they believe more that there are really bad mysteries around than what is actually in this spec. That's sometimes, to some extent that's true. But certainly not in all cases. And I think we, as the S1000D steering committee, are somewhat guilty of fostering that, in that we produce over 3,500 pages now. And so not knowing what you don't know, and the fact that it's 3,500 pages.
That frightens people sometimes.
But embarrassingly, I did a project for myself, where I designed this fictitious piece of ground satellite communications equipment, and then deployed S1000D in theory, and that 3,500 pages came down to 786 pages.
Okay,
and all I did was followed Figure 1 from Chapter 2.1, and that's how easy S1000D is.
And Paul has been working with the specification forever, because every time he's asked the question, certainly when he was asked questions in the presentations over the last few days, he can quote to you chapter, section, subsection, paragraph of where things are actually listed in the specification, which is more than what I could do. That's absolutely for sure. So I know that over the last couple of days, we've been talking a lot about the vision for all of these specifications, and I keep calling them ASD specifications, and Paul's been telling me off certainly around when it comes to S1000D, and I've been going around and correcting the vendors this week saying, you need to drop the ASD from that. But from S1000D, and now we've got all of these sister and supporting specifications, this integrated suite that's coming more and more now. People are talking about it, the S3000Ls, the 6000Ts, all of these things. Where is it that we're going? So for the benefit of those that didn't make it to the conference and are hearing lots of anecdotal discussions around all of these new specifications and standards coming our way, in a nutshell, maybe explain to people what they are and what they do.
In a nutshell. There are two stories to tell. One is on S1000D itself. There are three parent organisations that maintain and own S1000D, and they are ASD, AIA, and then the civil counterpart, ATA. From an S-Series perspective, there are only two parent organisations, and they are AIA and ASD, and those two parent organisations have an MOU between them solely to work on and maintain the S-Series specifications. S1000D is really well established now, despite what we were just talking about in terms of implementation in new projects and by new people. But the S-Series is new, and ever since I've been involved with the S-Series, which has been the last 8 or 9 years actually, I've been preaching from the mountaintops, to quote Martin Luther King, that the S-Series is the first bunch of ILS specifications that are truly integrated. Mm-hmm. And my presentation this afternoon actually talks to that. And that integration is the foundation of what we've put together for contracting. And the reason that they're totally integrated is that all their processes speak to each other. So when you create an output from S4000P, that is an input into S3000L, into the maintenance task analysis for preventive maintenance. And if you don't have that, then your maintenance task analysis becomes very difficult. And then, of course, the output from maintenance task analysis is the input for maintenance procedures in S1000D. So they're all linked to each other. And the reason I mention that is because once I've been realised that I've been, screaming at this avalanche of snow, waiting for the world to take on the S-Series, by telling the world about this integration, it occurred to me that, just a minute. So in the Q1 of 2019, we release issue 2 of S10000I, and then in Q3 we release issue 2 of S3000L. So the two things there, because they're not coming out at the same time, are out of step.
Sure.
So a couple of years ago, I suggested to the ILS Council, in fact, it was the very first thing that I said when I became chair of the ILS Council. I said, if we're saying that these things are integrated, then let's integrate them. And what we're going to do is April 30th, 2021, is release issue 1 of the complete suite of the S-Series ILS specifications. And that will be all the specs released on one day, and then 2 years later, all the specs will be updated.
Makes
so
sense,
they'll always be in step with each other, and therefore totally integrated.
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense, for sure. So I know that Paul's a very busy man, and I said that this wouldn't take very long. And if you want to learn more about S1000D and you want to learn more about these upcoming specifications that are coming out, they have formal websites, s1000d.org, and they all reference each other. I think they've all got websites, haven't they?
Yeah.
3000L, each individual ones have got individual websites. I'll put a link down below if you want to go and learn. You can actually go and download the specifications and start looking at them as they stand, so you can have a look at where the thought processes are and how these specifications are going to talk to each other. And I would suggest also as well that you register when you download. You can download without registering, but if you get on the distribution list, then you get notified when there are events like this coming up.
Maybe next year, which will be not just an S1000D user forum, but an S-Series user forum.
Okay, I think this.
So
I think this.
I
think we're seeing now that these events are broadening in scope. Today is the ILS day, so we're now looking at, or the integrated specification day, which is looking at these now sister and supporting specifications of S1000D, and I think this event will only get bigger and broader in terms of, when we started these things years ago, it was very specific S1000D, and we're seeing more and more topics coming in now. And now I would like to add that I don't think that's an official announcement.
No, it's not,
absolutely not, because there's lots of talk about how the next set of events are going to be run. But certainly get yourselves on the distribution, because you get notified about these kind of events and any other future events that are coming out. Not only that, you get told when there are updates and fixes, as they like to call them, to the schemas, to the updates, to the specifications.
There's just one thing I'd like to add to that, Mike, that with regards to downloading the specs, we've actually produced what we call an overview document. And that it gives what we call a 10-liner for every spec, describes at fairly high level about what each specification does and how they're all integrated together. And I'll give you the link to that.
Yeah, we'll drop that in there, and so you can download that. So how do people get in touch with you, Paul?
Oh, just normal email.
LinkedIn. What I like to do is, rather than publish people's emails address, I'll put Paul's profile in the showcase notes of this particular podcast. So if you want to connect with Paul, and what Paul doesn't know about these specifications or what's happening, it's just not worth knowing. And so he's certainly somebody that, if you are moving in these circles and you are working in these circles, that you should be connected with. And whilst he's always happy to answer questions, he may not necessarily answer emails straight away because he gets so many, but he will certainly get back to you if you are having a challenge. And because, like me, you're very passionate about this subject, and you certainly been in it certainly a very, very long time. So, and I'm not implying that you're an old man in any way at all.
65 next month.
65 young. So, Paul, that just leads me to say thank you very much for this, because I know that you're a busy man and I know that you keep getting railroaded. When do you travel back?
We're not going back until Saturday, actually. We're going to have a nice and easy trip back. He wished.
Well, now that the breaking news, as I'm looking at the TV, is that we have a Brexit deal that has just been agreed. Although the face I'm looking at right now on the TV is Nigel Farage, and he doesn't look very happy. So, in any case, Paul, thank you very much.
You're welcome,
and I really enjoyed that. And again, connect with Paul, like, share, subscribe. I'm Michael Ingledew. I'm all about making you successful with your technical documentation, technical information strategies. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, thumbs up, all those kind of things. Speak to you very soon.